If you feel like you're over accommodating, you don't know where your boundaries lie, you always people please and appease others, maybe you're other focused, you focus on other people before yourselves, you worry about other people, their needs, their wants, their desires, but you're sometimes wondering, what do I really want? What do I really stand for? What do I really need? And when you look inside, you can't quite find it, figure it out. It's like there's an empty space. Then you may be over-identified with a fawn response, which is a survival strategy where in childhood environments, typically when there was perhaps a narcissistic or aggressive parent, you learn to de-escalate using these techniques of people-pleasing and appeasing, over-accommodating, stretching your boundaries in order to de-escalate and calm down the aggressor. If this is something that feels relevant to you, we are going to explore these ideas in this book here, Complex PTSD through Pete Walker, and also this book here, Karen Horney, Our Inner Conflicts, and that book is absolutely excellent to understand this idea of people pleasing, which I think is analogous here of her terminology of moving towards. You could say that this is a psycho-spiritual disorder because it is a confusion of identity. Your core self, your true self, the one that knows what you want, what you need, where your boundaries lie, where it is that you're going in the world, you've lost contact with it. There's no substance there. You look inside and you can't quite feel contact with yourself. And in place of that hollow void, it's like you draw in and pull in other people's wants, needs and desires. Karen Horney states that we over-index and over-exaggerate some of the ways in which we relate to others, or that there's similarity with others. It's like we turn up the dial, and the ways in which we're different to others, we turn that down. So we mute ourselves. We don't speak our differences. We don't speak our opinions where there might be disagreeability. But we turn up the similarities. So imagine that you go to a social function. There's 5 different people. The first person you walk up to loves bacon. You're okay with it. You know, you might like a croissant, something like that. You might like a scone, a little cake. But you don't really love it and you don't really bake. But to this individual, bacon, for you, all you do is bake. You love bacon. You're a bacon enthusiast. It's the best thing ever. The next person you speak to, they love rock music. You think it's okay. You might like one band. But now, this is your favourite genre of music. It trumps all else. You don't really like it. It's all you listen to. And that goes on and on and on through each person that you meet. You morph and shape to meet these things. When you're talking to someone, you're hyper attuned to their body language, to their facial cues, to their tone of voice. You know when you're reaching harmony, and you know when you're reaching disconnect, and you immediately move and shape like the chameleon or cuttlefish. You change colours, you morph, you blend into the environment to reach harmony again and again, to avoid conflict, to avoid those edges of difference that might rub up against each other. And so we can draw upon Karen Horney here to understand some of these points in a bit more depth. Because of the indiscriminate nature of his needs, the compliant type will be prone to overrate his congeniality and the interests he has in common with those around him and disregard the separating factors. So the differences that we have, turn right down. The commonalities, ramped right up. She goes on to say, he tries automatically to live up to the expectation of others, or to what he believes to be their expectations, often to the extent of losing sight of his own feelings. He becomes unselfish, self-sacrificing, undemanding, except for his unbounded desire for affection. He becomes compliant, over-considerate, within the limits possible for him, over-appreciative, over-grateful, generous. And that's why it's a psycho-spiritual disorder. There's this real loss of contact with your fundamental self. There's this compliance, this morphing, this shaping to meet what you think and anticipate to be what the other requires of you. This came into play typically because you had a narcissistic or aggressive parent that saw you perhaps as an extension of themselves. They didn't see you for your authentic self, for who you are, but they saw you for who they could shape you to be, or who they required you to be. Peter Walker talks about how there's this level of parentification that happens from the narcissistic parent. So there's a distortion, there's a flipping of the parent-child dynamic where the child begins to meet the parent's needs. What does mother need? What does father need? Do I need to be the listening ear? Do I need to listen to all of mother's problems? All of the men she's dating and sleeping with and how she's unsatisfied? Do I have to listen to father and how much he hates mother? How much he's disgusted by her and how much he wishes he never married her, and perhaps how much he never wanted you? And so you listen to all of this, and the aggression wears you down. It doesn't feel safe. As Pete Walker states, the narcissistic parent presses a child into codependent service, usually involving scaring and shaming him out of developing a sense of self. And so you're petrified to be yourself. It meant maybe you'd be abused or abandoned or at least scathed at. Either way, you found that you didn't belong, and the only way to find belonging was to distort that relationship. And just to add a bit more here from Pete Walker, as I feel it's necessary and it's a good quote, the disenfranchisement of the Fawn type begins in childhood. She learns early that a modicum of safety and attachment can be gained by becoming the helpful and compliant servant of her exploitative parents. A Fawn type / codependent is usually the child of at least one narcissistic parent. The narcissist reverses the parent-child relationship. And one thing people are usually curious about is they're wondering, am I a nice person, or is this predominantly a defensive strategy in a Fawn type? And when there's that edge, when there's that shadow quality, because often the Fawn type believes themselves to be the better person, they take the high road, they're the compassionate one, they're the loving one. If only the world was as loving as I am, the world would be a better place. But there's a key distinguishment here where, because it's compulsive, because there's underlying anxiety, there isn't a true choice. It's the nervous system patterning, the response, it's automatic. It's part of the autonomic nervous system that begins to mobilize us. And so there's two key aspects here to understand if this is really an authentic choice, if this is really a natural adaptation, or if it is predominantly this defensive strategy. And these two aspects are compulsiveness and they are anxiety. And so where there's anxiety, there can be compulsive defenses against it. And so if you want to do a thought experiment, you can imagine right now, think about a moment either in your history or think about this random scenario now, where there's a particular attention where in this case you are aware of some of your needs. Perhaps you've decided tonight, I'm going to go get my favourite ice cream, going to go grab a tub of Haagen-Dazs, going to lay down with my dog, going to put on my favourite movie, I'm going to have a relaxed night. And you've really been looking forward to it, you really want this moment, you really want to decompress here. And what happens is you get that text message from that familiar person who you struggle to set boundaries with. Let's just say it's a parent in this moment. Let's say that your father he carries on getting you to wash his car every Saturday night. For some reason, Saturday night, I don't know why it's not the daytime, but Saturday night he wants you to wash his car. And you do it every single week. You've found this moment, you're ready to relax. You're in your PJs, the dog's on your lap, the tub of ice cream. You're about to press play. You get the text message. What is it like in this moment to say no? Father, Dad, I'm not coming. I'm not going to do that. I'm not going to wash your car tonight. I've just sat down. I've just started to relax. What comes up for you? Really think about that moment. And you may notice anxiety begins to boil up. There's something fundamentally unsafe. Perhaps you anticipate a strong, aggressive, rupturing reaction from your father. And perhaps that's been true in the past, and perhaps it's even true now. But regardless, the response is that you compulsively say yes. All of a sudden, you push the dog off your lap, you turn the TV off, your ice cream's back in the freezer, and you find yourself there reluctantly washing the car. You couldn't say no. It wasn't a choice. It wasn't an option for you. And that's how you know that it's the compulsivity and the anxiety at play. The person with that cohesive, strong inner structure, that sense of connection to their true self, they can say no. They could also say yes, paradoxically, if that's what they wanted to do in that moment. The point is they have choice. They can say no and they can say yes. And fundamentally, if they say no, there isn't going to be this strong, overthrowing kind of trauma response, like a PTSD emotional flashback, where you feel all of a sudden unsafe. You feel like something bad's going to happen, like the world's going to end. And so that underlying anxiety, what Karen Horney calls basic anxiety, is really key and fundamental here to understanding that we also can't just, because what may happen is we may say, I fawn too much. What I should do is I need to really assert these boundaries. I really need to say no. I really need to stop being a pushover. And on some level, of course, that is absolutely true. But if you don't deal with the underlying anxiety, you will simply flip from a fawn response to a fight response. And so you may have heard people, and you may even do it yourself, where you make statements such as, I used to be a pushover, but no more. I used to say yes to everything, but no more. And so now you find that all you can say is no. And so there's still not the optionality, because there's the underlying anxiety and there's the emotional flashback and there's the sense of when you used to be used. There's that sense of all of the time that you said yes. There's such a chronic shame, a toxic shame there, that now you have to guard against the anxiety there. No, I'm never letting anyone ever again walk all over me. And you can tell, right, there's this charge. There's this real charge of anxiety, and perhaps in this moment the anger that comes with a fight response, that you don't want to be a pushover anymore. And so we have to get to that underlying anxiety so that we're no longer protecting, we're no longer guarding against this, because we feel safe, we feel cohesive, connected internally. So one of the ways we begin to deal with this underlying anxiety is we begin to build the window of tolerance. Our window of tolerance expands. We can tolerate lower lows and higher highs without going into defensive strategy. And so what we can do here is we begin to track the level of sensation, because importantly, we have to build a relationship with this anxiety. We have to begin to feel, what is anxiety for us? What does it feel like? Is it a tingling? Is it a butterfly? Is it nausea? How does it appear for you? How does it begin? Because what's going to happen is, before the emotion builds, before the need to appease the other person, before the behavioral response comes in, there will be this build-up where your sensations lead to emotions, which lead to the behavior. And so if we can mindfully slow this process down, if we can hold that anxiety for a moment, just for a moment, think in this instant, this is a good opportunity. It may be very, very difficult at first. It may be way too difficult at first to deal with this in face-to-face contact. But imagine you receive a message. And so there's the capacity to have a bit of time to slow it down. What's it like to receive that message? How does it provoke this anxiety? What's it like, instead of immediately responding, to just pause for a moment, to sit with that anxiety, even just for a few moments, and then begin to expand that tolerance. 5 seconds at first, then 10 seconds, then 15 seconds, eventually for a few minutes. And you may notice this shame comes in, toxic shame. The inner critic gets activated, says you're a bad person. So you need to have a level of self-compassion here, a connection, you could say, an empathic, motherly-like attunement to yourself, to have compassion, but also the healthy inner father to say, no, I don't want to do this behavior anymore. I don't want to keep doing that. And so you begin to soothe this anxiety. You hold it, you have compassion for yourself, but you also have the fatherly compassion to say no. Maybe at first this is too difficult still, but you're beginning to set some level of limit. And eventually this affect tolerance, this window of tolerance begins to expand. So this is a kind of exposure therapy-like approach where you begin to digest, you begin to hold this anxiety in a different way, and it becomes more and more tolerable to you. And as the anxiety becomes more tolerable, there becomes less necessity to defend against it. So you begin to feel this anxiety instead of acting out of the anxiety. And as this happens, you may notice over time the anxiety begins to diminish and you begin to feel more contact with your needs. There isn't a repression that happens, a discardment, a kind of sacrifice of your own needs. You stay in contact with them. Perhaps you even begin to develop a healthy level of anger. Believe that. Imagine you develop a healthy level of anger in response to someone constantly trying to transgress on your boundaries and use you. Healthy anger. And then you can healthily assert, but importantly you stay in contact with yourself. The psycho-spiritual disorder of being disconnected with yourself, replacing your needs with another, there's no need for that anymore. You begin to build a cohesive, empathic relationship with yourself. And the rupture begins to heal. The underlying anxiety begins to dissipate, and you begin to gain more access and variety to healthy nervous system responses. So you can fight when you need to fight by asserting yourself, setting boundaries, a move in against approach in Karen Horney's terms. You can do a move away approach in Karen Horney terms, which is the flight response in some ways, where you basically withdraw, you find solitude when you need it. And also, importantly, you can move towards. You can have the healthy, Fawn response. You can sacrifice some needs when you need to, when you feel it's appropriate. But there isn't that underlying anxiety, and there isn't a compulsive defense against it. I'll see you in the next video.